The NBA salary cap is now more strict than ever. Having a player on a big contract that doesn't perform is a death sentence. Bad contracts can prevent a team from adding free agents and making meaningful trades, which could be the difference between winning a championship and going into a rebuild. So, here are the worst contracts for every NBA team, starting with the highest spending team in the NBA, the Phoenix Suns. The Suns have the most expensive roster in NBA history, with over $220 million in salaries, plus nearly $200 million more in projected luxury tax. Matt Ishbia is the first NBA owner who'll surpass $400 million in player salaries, and most of that will go to KD, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, who'll make $150 million combined. And as the least productive part of that trio, it's only right that Beal gets called out. Only 16 points per game and 0 playoff wins? That was not what the Suns signed up for. And because Beal is owed $160 million through 2027, and the fact that he's one of 2 people in the NBA with a no-trade clause, the Suns can do nothing but pray that his play improves. And the second most expensive team in the NBA was the one who swept the Suns in the playoffs, the Timberwolves. And if you asked a year ago who had the worst contract in the NBA, most people would have instantly said Rudy Gobert. But the Frenchman just won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year, which was exactly what he was brought in for. So we can't name him, no matter what Draymond Green might think about his defense.
We need to do this. You need to get a stop. It's you, my man, that's getting cooked, so it's no we.
So that leaves us with Karl Anthony Towns, who will earn $49 million in 2025, plus $170 million more through 2028. The former #1 pick is one of the best shooting centers in NBA history, but he only averaged 19 points per game in the playoffs, and was one of the worst players on the team in the loss to Dallas. If Cat has another lackluster performance in 2025, don't be surprised if he gets traded to keep the Wolves below the second apron. And next up, we have the defending champs, who won the NBA title with the 5th most expensive roster in the league. Jaylen Brown signed the biggest contract in NBA history, worth $285 million over 5 years. But that record was recently broken by his running mate Jason Tatum, whose 5-year contract is worth $315 million over 5 years. However, neither of those contracts should hurt the Celtics' future, because both of their superstars are just entering their prime. And that makes the worst contract on the Celtics Jrue Holiday's, who's entering the first year of his $135 million 4-year contract extension. Now don't get it twisted, Jrue is great, and his impact on winning the championship was enormous. But Jrue is also 34 years old, and he'll be 38 when his deal expires, so a production drop is definitely expected. And ironically, this brings us to the guy Jrue got traded for, and that's Damian Lillard. The Milwaukee Bucks will pay Lillard $48 million in 2025 and $58 million in 2026, and he has a $63 million player option for 2027. And despite his talent, Dame time is running out of time, because he's only a month younger than Holiday, and he's been getting more injury-prone in recent years. Largely due to Dame and Giannis's mammoth contracts, Milwaukee is one of 4 teams who are above the second apron, which makes their life extremely hard to navigate in terms of player additions, on top of paying the luxury tax in a small market, which is never fun. If Lillard doesn't stay healthy and help Milwaukee make another finals run, this trade will go down as one of the most expensive mistakes in Bucks history. And for all the talk about the second apron, we've now named all 4 teams who are above the $190 million line. The first below the line, and the 5th highest spending team in the NBA, is the LA Lakers, who don't have any terrible contracts on the books, and the only big bucks they're spending are on their 2 superstars. LeBron James signed a new 2-year deal worth $100 million, which is an extremely big check for a 40-year-old, but it's hard to argue that LeBron doesn't deserve it, as he's still one of the 10 or 15 best players in the NBA. So that leaves us with AD, who is one of the best rim protectors in the NBA, while averaging an efficient 25 points and 12 rebounds. But he's also been injury-prone throughout his career, and the Lakers owe him $230 million over the next 4 years. When he's 35, AD will earn a whopping $66 million. And the team that the Lakers defeated in their last NBA Finals also has an aging superstar on a big contract. But that could change soon, as there have been rumors that the Miami Heat and Jimmy Butler are not as thrilled with each other as they used to be. Jimmy will be 35 at the start of the 2024-25 season, and he's in the last year of his contract worth $48 million, with a $52 million player option option for 2026. Butler hasn't been the healthiest in recent years, and as he gets up in age, it's doubtful that he'll get another contract like the one he has now. While he's certainly become one of the most legendary Heat players ever, leading the team to 2 NBA Finals, Miami's roster doesn't look like it can return there, and they might pivot from Butler and trade him while they still can. And speaking of teams that defeated Miami in the Finals, we have the Denver Nuggets, who are struggling to keep their core players. After Bruce Brown and Jeff Green left following the title run in 2023, now they've lost KCP, one of the best two-way shooting guards in the NBA. One would argue that DeAndre Jordan having any kind of salary is a bad contract because DJ stopped being a serviceable NBA player 3 years ago. But the worst contract on the Nuggets has to be Michael Porter Jr.'s. In theory, MPJ is a general manager's dream, an efficient, knockdown sniper who can create his own shot and has learned to defer and play his role on offense. But in reality, he's the new Tobias Harris, an overqualified third or fourth option who's earning superstar money, with some MIA games in the playoffs. Paying Jokic and Murray was a no-brainer for the Nuggets, but because they have to give Jamal a new contract and they also have to pay Aaron Gordon, it's MPJ who's really the odd man out, and whose salary is now forcing the Nuggets to let go their core pieces. And letting go is precisely what the next team has done, despite having the richest owner in NBA history, Steve Ballmer. The second apron rule was probably the hardest on the Clippers, because Ballmer would easily pay the luxury tax for a chance to go wild during a deep playoff run. But with the new salary cap rules, the Clippers were forced to let Paul George go for free, because they aren't willing to tie themselves to a player who hasn't brought them more than one berth in the conference finals. The Clippers have already paid Kawhi, who will earn $152 million over the next 3 years. And this sounds horrible, not because Kawhi isn't a great player, but because he's never available in the playoffs. In the last 5 years since he arrived in LA, Leonard has been healthy only once during the postseason. And with the degenerative disease in his knees, his contract is not looking like a great bet. And you know what else doesn't look like a great bet? Going over the second apron to pay a large contract to a franchise legend who hasn't been performing up to his usual standards. In the classic "what have you done for me lately" scenario, the Golden State Warriors didn't want to give Klay Thompson a big contract. And if you're thinking logically and not emotionally, that was the right thing to do. After years of paying a hefty luxury tax, the Dubs are now only the 9th most expensive team in the NBA, with $175 million tied to team-friendly contracts. Yes, Steph is the highest-paid player in the NBA, earning $55 million, but he's still worth every penny of it. So the worst Warriors contract belongs to Draymond Green, but more so due to his actions that keep him off the court than his actual play. And if you think we just disrespected Klay Thompson, think again. Because if you're the Dallas Mavericks, giving Klay a 3-year, $48 million contract is a great deal. Unlike the Warriors, Dallas is still under the $178 million first apron after signing Klay, and they have enough wiggle room to maneuver trades during the season. So they are getting one of the greatest shooters ever who's going to mesh extremely well with Luka and Kyrie offensively. The Mavs have most of their players on team-friendly deals, and their only big contracts are those of Luka and Kyrie. But because of his $41 million salary at the age of 32, with a deep history of missing games, Kyrie has to take the proverbial punch as the worst contract on the Mavericks. And the 10th highest spending team in the NBA is the Atlanta Hawks, who just traded DeJounte Murray, and now don't have any bad contracts, unless you consider Trae Young's $43 million a bad deal. With the new #1 pick on board, and many good value contracts such as Clint Capella, Bojan Bogdanovic, and DeAndre Hunter, the Hawks could easily shop out everybody and go into a complete rebuild around Risa Shea. Or they could hope that Risa Shea becomes a great contributor immediately, and that they'll make a playoff run that will make Trae Young happy and willing to stay. But if the season starts rocky, don't be surprised if Trae is gone, along with a few other guys previously mentioned. And now we've come to the team that used to be known for bad contracts, but as of today, they don't have any. We're talking about the New York Knicks, whose best player will make only $24 million in 2025. On top of that, Jalen Brunson just signed a 4-year, $156 million extension, which is $113 million less than his projected max if he waited a year to re-sign. Brunson signed his contract to make the Knicks more competitive and able to retain players, like his Villanova buddies, who are all paid well below their market value. Even Julius Randle, despite his flaws, doesn't have a bad deal at $28 million, though that might change next year when he's a free agent. But this season, the Knicks don't have any contracts to worry about, as they have a deep roster, plus flexibility to add more pieces to what looks like a championship contender. And now we've reached the teams below the $172 million luxury tax, starting with the Toronto Raptors. Their highest paid player next year will be Emmanuel Quickley, who just signed a 5-year, $175 million contract. While Quickley certainly has his qualities as a scorer, so far in his career he hasn't shown that he's capable of being a first or second option on a playoff team. He did average 18 and 7 for the Raptors last season, and there is certainly room for growth as a primary ball handler, but giving him the keys to the offense doesn't seem like a great play as of now. And next up, we have the New Orleans Pelicans, who are in a conundrum on what to do with Brandon Ingram. B.I. is in the last year of his deal and is making $36 million in 2025, but wants a $200 million extension, which would certainly qualify him for the worst contract on the team. But with big salaries for Zion, DeJounte Murray, and C.J. McCollum, who will all be earning north of $30 million, Ingram probably won't be getting his wish. So that leaves us with McCollum as the elder statesman, and because his defense isn't up to par with the rest of the high-flying Pelicans. And one of the most talented scorers of the last decade has just signed with a new team, the Sacramento Kings. DeMar DeRozan will earn $74 million with the Kings over the next 3 years, which is not a lot for a player who averaged over 20 points in the last 11 NBA seasons. But since DeRozan is 35 years old and doesn't really move the needle for Sacramento in terms of winning a title, he has the worst contract on the Kings. And just like Joe Rogan, Klay Thompson, and many others, will move from California to Texas, where the Houston Rockets have a plethora of young talent on rookie deals, namely Reed Shepherd, Alperen Şengün, Jabari Smith, Cam Whitmore, and Amen Thompson. Their only bloated contract belongs to Fred VanVleet, who will earn $42 million in 2025 and has a $45 million team option for 2026. But the Rockets probably won't pick up his option, since Fred averaged only 17 points per game for them last season, the lowest scoring output for a player earning over $40 million per season, other than Rudy Gobert, who isn't paid to score. But if the Rockets decide to trade VanVleet in the last year of his deal, this shouldn't be too hard to do, unlike the Chicago Bulls, who have one of the most untradeable contracts in the NBA on the books, and that's Zach LaVine and the $138 million he's owed over the next 3 years. LaVine has shown glimpses of being a superstar, but because he's often injured and doesn't play great defense, his contract is holding the Bulls hostage. Next up, we have the Indiana Pacers, who are one of those teams that never go into luxury tax and are extremely careful about giving out big contracts. Unsurprisingly, they don't have any particular player to name here, as only Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton have big $40 million deals, but they deserve to be paid as stars. However, Siakam is currently 30 years old, and he's going to earn $53 million at the age of 34, which might be a little steep if he loses some of his athleticism. And a loss of athleticism is also something the Philadelphia 76ers should be concerned about, because they just signed Paul George at a premium price, $212 million over 4 years. The Sixers' championship window is now, so swinging for the fences makes sense. But George is 34, which means he'll be 38 in the last year of his deal, when he's supposed to earn $56 million. And because George has a long injury history, this contract might become a big headache for the Sixers in the coming years. But the only headache the Memphis Grizzlies have is Ja Morant's online activity. However, if he manages to stay on the court, Morant and his running mate Desmond Bane might be the best backcourt in the NBA. They are both earning north of $34 million with ascending deals, but they are signed long-term, which is perfect for a small market team like the Grizzlies. All of the Grizzlies' core players are signed to below-market value deals, and they won't have to worry about extending any of them until 2026, so they don't really have any bad contracts. And the next team down the line is another small market team, the Portland Trail Blazers. The Blazers are in the middle of a rebuild, but they have many valuable NBA contributors, such as Jeremy Grant, Denny Avdia, Robert Williams, and Anthony Simons, who'd all be nice additions to championship contenders. But by drafting center Donovan Clingan, the Blazers are likely moving away from DeAndre Ayton, who's owed $69 million over the next 2 seasons. The former #1 pick just hasn't reached expectations, and he's definitely a player to watch in trade rumors. And even though they have only the 22nd biggest payroll in the league, the next team is a true title contender. The Oklahoma City Thunder have arguably the best GM in the NBA, Sam Presti, who positioned the Thunder to be successful for the next decade. Adding Caruso and Hartenstein to their young core will make OKC much more dangerous than they were last season, and with the maturation of their young Big Three, the Thunder could legitimately win the title next season. Paying Hartenstein $29 million per year might be a little steep, but his rebounding, toughness, and shot making are precisely what the team needed. So it's hard to even say that his contract is bad, let alone that it's the worst. It's also hard to say that Darius Garland has a bad contract, but we have to. When the Cleveland Cavaliers extended Garland and gave him $197 million over 5 years, it seemed like a no-brainer. He could dribble, pass, and shoot, showed maturity in the pick and roll that was far beyond his years, and was an all-star in just his third season. But since he signed this extension, Garland regressed. His numbers dropped across the board, and in last year's playoffs, he was the most disappointing member of the team, not able to back up Donovan Mitchell when the Cavs needed him most. If Garland returns to form, it's going to be fine and dandy. But right now, he's a bit overpaid. And you remember back when we said Bradley Beal was the worst contract in the NBA? We still stand by that because of the longevity of his deal. But the most overpaid player in the league plays for the Brooklyn Nets. Well, kinda. Since he got traded for James Harden, Ben Simmons played only 57 games for the Nets in 2.5 years, averaging a terrible 6 points per game. Simmons will earn $40 million in 2025, and since it's the last year of his contract, it's also going to be his last season in Brooklyn. And the next team on this list is surely one of the most dysfunctional franchises in the NBA. It's the Wizards, who made the dumbest move of the offseason when they traded Denny Avdija for the expiring contract of Malcolm Brogdon, since Avdija had arguably the best contract in the NBA. But the worst contract on the Washington payroll is not arguable. It's an absolute certainty. Jordan Poole will make $97 million in the next 3 years. And if he keeps playing shacked in a pool basketball with bad defense, poor decision-making, and forced shots, the future isn't going to get any brighter in DC. After the Wizards, we have a team that hasn't made the conference finals since ever. And that won't change next year, despite the promising talent of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. The only contract even worth a mention is Miles Bridges, who's going to be earning $25 million for the next 3 seasons. And it's not really a bad contract for an athletic 20-point scorer. If he stays healthy and stays out of trouble off the court, it might actually be a bargain. And the next team has only the 27th most expensive roster in the NBA, but they might be a threat to win the Eastern Conference. The Orlando Magic has the most upside in the East, led by Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, who are still on their rookie deals. Wagner's extension kicks in next season, and despite his talent, his $224 million over 5 years looks a little bit too pricey for a player that's likely never going to be a number 1 option. But for 2025, the Magic's highest paid player will be Jonathan Isaac, who also signed a big extension. When healthy, Isaac is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, but the problem is that the man has missed 60% of all possible games so far in his career, and if his body can't hold up, his extension will be a problem. However, despite Orlando's enormous potential, they are not the team with the most upside. That's the San Antonio Spurs. Thanks to Victor Wembanyama, who might become the best player in the NBA in 2025, they are positioned to be contenders for the next 2 decades. Along with Victor, they have other young pieces such as Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson, who are both tied to long-term, team-friendly contracts that are descending over the years. While some might argue that Vassell is overpaid, he'll earn under $30 million until 2029, when the salary cap will increase by 50%, and when that kind of money will be the average salary. And that's not bad for a young guy who averaged 19 points per game. So probably the worst contract on the team belongs to Zach Collins, who will earn $35 million in the next 2 years. And now we've come to the 2 cheapest teams in the NBA, Detroit and Utah, as the only 2 teams currently under the salary cap, with Utah being under the salary floor, which will require them to take players in to avoid paying penalties. So, for the 2 cheapest teams, it's hard to say that they have bad contracts. But if we had to choose, we'd go with Tobias Harris, whose agent is actually his father and definitely deserves praise, if not a raise. After he signed a max deal with the Sixers, Harris signed a 2-year, $52 million deal with the Pistons, which is the kind of money he'd never get elsewhere. And it also positions him to be a free agent again at the age of 34, when the salary cap will rise and he'll be able to sign for even more money. And finally, on the Jazz side, we have John Collins, who's also owed $52 million in the next 2 years, which is not great, but not terrible for a guy averaging 15 points per game. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to Nonstop and check out some of our other content.